This is the crazy story of Willie Francis, the teenage prisoner who survived death row. The life of Francis. While Francis lived in the small town of St. Martinville in Louisiana, he was one of 13 children. His family was impoverished, and they lived in a heavily racially segregated town back in the 1940s. Even though life was hard for Francis, he managed to find a job working for a white pharmacist known as Andrew Thomas, cleaning his shop and running errands. He was even considered a good employee by those who visited the store. However, all of that would change one night in November of 1944 when Andrew Thomas was murdered by an unknown gunman and the police couldn't find the culprit. One afternoon, Francis was met by two police officers in the street who were looking for a drug dealer. Upon seeing two police officers running his way, Francis attempted to escape, prompting them to arrest him on the apparent suspicion of being a drug dealer's accomplice. The police, however, couldn't connect him to any drug trade as they had no evidence whatsoever. So they began to question him about the murder of Andrew Thomas. According to the police, they found the murdered pharmacist's wallet and identification card in Francis's possession, which was very convenient to say the least. Throughout the entire interrogation process, Francis had no legal representation. Within minutes, the police had a signed confession from Francis, claiming to be the murderer, followed by his second confession the next day. Of course, the police denied coercing poor Francis into writing the confessions. 3 weeks after his arrest, Francis was brought to court. He did not find himself before a jury of his peers. Francis instead found himself in front of a grand jury of white men. And to make matters worse, his court appointed a white lawyer that was either incredibly incompetent or terribly malicious. His lawyer tried to reverse his plea of not guilty. He refused to make an opening statement, and he did not cross-examine witnesses or call out the dubious evidence levied against Francis. Unsurprisingly, Willie Francis was found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair. On May 3, 1946, 17-year-old Willie Francis prepared for his violent end via electrocution. He was strapped into Louisiana's electric chair, charmingly named Gruesome Gertie. Francis clenched his fists and awaited his death, but instead experienced the shock of a lifetime. It felt like 100,000 needles and pins were pricking in me all over, and my left leg felt like somebody was cutting it with a razor blade, Francis said, recounting the experience. Turns out that Gruesome Gertie had been incorrectly set up. The two men in charge of setting it up, Captain Effie Foster and an inmate named Vincent Venezia, were drunk during the process. They did a terrible job of it, causing Francis to miraculously survive, a fact that greatly upset the bloodthirsty Captain Foster, who repeatedly shouted, "I missed you this time, but I'll get you next week if I have to use a rock." After his failed execution, his family managed to help him find a new lawyer named Bertrand DeBlanc, fighting the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and bringing to light the shoddy evidence brought against Francis, like the fact that the murder weapon was never examined for fingerprints, and that the bullets in the gun he allegedly used didn't even match the bullets found in Thomas's body, and the fact that the coroner pointed out that Thomas was most likely killed by a professional, someone experienced with a gun. That, however, did not stop the Supreme Court from ruling against Francis 5-4, sealing his fate to be once again sent to the electric chair. DeBlanc, still hoping to fight the case, told Francis that he would take the case to the Supreme Court again, but a beaten-down Francis simply told him not to, saying, "I'm ready to die." On May 9, 1947, Francis found himself in the electric chair again. When asked if he had any last words, he replied, "Nothing at all." Executioners flipped the switch, and Francis was pronounced dead 5 minutes later. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.